Welcome to a special edition of DEI After 5 with Sacha. New episodes of DEI After 5 drop every Tuesday on YouTube. But tonight, DEI After 5 is live. And now, here's your host, Sacha Thompson.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to DEI After 5 Live. I am so excited about today's episode because this is one that has gotten a lot of buzz across social media, my inbox, just everything, because people want to ask questions. And so what better way to start off than to bring on some of the best practitioners in this space? So tonight I am welcoming three of my guests, Diya Khanna, Katrina Jones, and Dr. Sam Ray. Hello, ladies.
Hi. Hello. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us, Sacha.
Thank you for being here. And I also want to introduce our interpreter for tonight, Jamika. So she has joined my team and will be here doing ASL interpretation throughout the evening. So we're just going to dive in. So first of all, for everyone, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We'll be able to answer those. There's also a phone number that you can dial right over there to dial in for the show and ask your questions, and we will get you on live as well too. And just in case we run into any difficulties, we'll be able to handle a lot of that behind the scenes. The other thing that I want to let people know too is throughout the show, I will be showing a QR code. And what that is for, I am giving away 2 free memberships to the Shine app. So anyone that follows me know that I'm all about wellness and self-care. And so Shine is an app that allows you to do that. Daily meditations, wellness, all of that created by people of color. And so I'm giving away 2 free 1-year memberships. So all you need to do is go to the code or go to the link, and that will get you into for the drawing. All right, so let's dive in. So I will have my guest back up. And the first question that came in to my inbox was a question that I think was a great one to start with. So what led you into DEI? So Sam, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I've had a non-linear journey. So I started out in the biomedical space doing biomedical research, and I always wanted to be a doctor. But I quickly realized that there were so many inequities in the healthcare system, and it was a systemic problem, not necessarily people just needing help physically. So I wanted to change the systems. So then I got into public health, and I learned even more about health inequities and things like cumulative advantage and disadvantage. And I'm like, I wonder how this shows up in like other areas. And when we go to work, since we spend like 90,000 hours, I think it is, or something like that at work in our lives. So that's what led me into this space. It was like a roundabout way through accreditation. And in accreditation, there's an aspect of assessing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that was like my doorway into it. And then I did my doctoral program and did research on racial microaggressions that Black women face in the workplace and how that affects their work performance. And yeah.
Oh, thank you. So we'll go to Diya.
Yeah, the way that I got into DEI is actually similar to Dr. Sam in that I started with journalism, and I thought, okay, I'm a great writer, I can tell stories. Well, it turns out that there is a preference to whose stories we listen to based on who has access and opportunity. And it got me thinking how many people's perspectives, realities, histories, and contexts we don't hear about, we don't learn about. So I combined that with a degree in education where, just putting that institutional lens gave me insights into what we need to create in the workplace to make sure that people have that equal opportunity. I wanted to also shout out a really important mentor of mine, Ratna Omidvar, who's a senator, a Canadian senator who started me on this journey about 20 years ago. She sat me down and as an immigrant, she told me, it's about changing the policies and practices in our society. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I found myself in the workplace with Sacha, actually. So that was an interesting side story, but it's all led me to where I am now.
Wow. It's so funny because I think we all have similar, I didn't start here. I'm looking at Derek said, I didn't choose DEI, DEI chose me, right? I often say I was born into it, right? I came here as an immigrant, at the age of 2 and always knew I was different. And so kind of led me to thinking about how other people were different and how they were othered throughout my career. And so through education, through tech, through nonprofit, that was kind of the focus, like whose voice isn't being heard or who's being marginalized in this. And so that is always just where my focus has been. Katrina, what about you?
Yeah, my story is, of course, very, very similar. Growing up in the States, growing up in Texas in particular, in predominantly white environments and predominantly white schools, and usually being the only Black kid or one of maybe 2, and experiencing racism really early on in really visceral and violent ways. And so I was always hyper aware of people who were not included, who were excluded, and who existed on the margins, and hyper aware of differences. And it made me really empathetic and someone who looked for those people who were on the margins. And it ultimately contributed to me, majoring in ethnic studies, which was the deep exploration and academic study and research of the history of inequities and of the systems, and understanding how you get to where we are now. That it didn't just start from nothing. It didn't just happen overnight. That this has been centuries and centuries and products of systems that we're seeing today, which also tied into my, HR career. I saw that as the opportunity to make a real difference in organizations and in the experiences that people have, since we spend so much time at work.
Mm-hmm. And it's so funny because as you were talking, something that came up for me was how interdisciplinary this work is, right? Ethnic studies, my background's in sociology. Diya talked about journalism. Sam talked about going in from the health perspective. And so many people come into this work from so many different places, yet we all end up in the same space. So I want to kind of go down that path a little bit and talk about one of the questions that came in was, what are some of the credentials that are needed to do this work? Because there have been a lot of programs. Cornell has been one that's been around for years. And if anyone has watched any episodes of DEI After 5 with Lolita Chandler, she was one of the first, my cousin, was one of the first people to teach in that program. And so wanted to just talk to you all about that, and anyone could just jump in.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a start on this. I think credential wise, there's a level of experience that you want in DEI that you can get in a number of ways, perhaps through resources, frameworks, studies. But I think it's really important that that's combined with a degree of lived experience. Katrina, you spoke about this beautifully. The empathy that we develop along that journey, that curiosity, our histories, I think we really need to place an importance on that when we rely on practitioners, when we decide to hire practitioners, when we invite practitioners to speak on stages, because that's the element that takes us from a place of just checkboxing to the actualization of this work.
Yeah. I would absolutely agree with that. I think there are the skills that have served people well and will continue to serve people well in terms of skills and capabilities around change management, being able to both lead and influence change management, as well as organizational and systems design. Um, and I think what has served us is not necessarily what is necessarily important to us as the work continues to evolve.
Hmm.
I would say that I think having a healthy balance of lived experience coupled with, I don't want to call them the soft skills, but I guess some soft skills and then technical educational skills. So, like a foundation of understanding like systemic oppression, for example, and how that shows up and shapes the society in which we live in. I think everyone, regardless of your identity or intersecting levels of marginalization, has to understand how that functions, especially if you're working in the States, and how that influences so many other systems. And there are a bunch of other foundational things that I think are critical to know. And then I think because DEI is such a broad sector, I guess, or space, if you're going to specialize in a specific aspect of DEI, so like accessibility, I don't know everything there is to know about accessibility. I may know what ableism means and like things that you should and should not say, and the concept of creating equity, but I don't understand fully the nuances of accessibility and ADA compliance. Like there is a whole sector specific to accessibility and people who have disabilities. So I think depending on your niche area, there's further learning you have to be aware of. So I do think it's important to have lived experience, right? So I would not want to talk about what it's like to be like a woman in India, for example. I don't know, because that's just not my lived experience. Even if I do tons of research on it, I should not take the space of someone who has that lived experience to then take over and talk for them and be their voice, quote unquote. But at the same time, if I am going to do something like develop DEI strategies, which is what I do, I still need to understand what strategic planning means and organizational management and change management and how to collect and assess data and how to do like mitigation and talk to different groups of people. So those are like the balance of foundational educational knowledge that you have to have coupled with the lived experience, coupled with some more technical skills, in my opinion.
Dr. Sam, you just hit on something that I think is critical in this conversation, which is you don't have to be an expert in everything, right? I think there's so many people that go into this field thinking one of two things. I have to know everything about everything, which is impossible to do, or they're so hyper focused on their one area that they forget to see the other sides of it or the other aspects and the intersections that happen, right? That happens so much in gender, where we're so hyper focused on gender that we forget about other identities that intersect with that and how that can show up very differently depending on what those identities are, right? So thank you for that, because I think that's a critical piece. So Bobby has asked the question, how can we prevent DEI from becoming another system of hierarchy where only a few get opportunities? So if anyone wants to jump on that one.
I have like a whole, I have so many thoughts, and I'm sure all of us do.
I'll let Dr. Sam go first. I just wanted to just say one thing about the last piece that you said. As we're talking about lived experiences, there's so much here to recognizing the limits of your lived experiences, right? And understanding that this is one perspective, but like you said, there are so many other perspectives, and leaning into both humility and curiosity in this work, that those are really important.
Yes, thank you. All right, Sam, hierarchy.
That actually ties in to a little bit of what I wanted to say. So it kind of piggybacks off of the last question you asked. And I feel like because we don't have any centralization or any type of standard, it's kind of like whoever's been doing this the longest and has the loudest voice gets the most visibility. And we go off of like their standards, and the people who are newest, they kind of fall by the wayside. And I've been hearing a lot of people who recently transitioned into this space say that. And then there's the nuance of being a consultant and trying to get clients, and like, how do you boost your visibility if you're newer and the field is so saturated and we don't have standards. So like people are just picking the people who have more visibility. And then because companies don't understand the nuances of the work that we do, they don't even have standards to choose who to work with. And to the question that's being asked, that's a very good question. I don't necessarily have an answer to tackle that right now. My long-term answer would be to centralize and create some sort of standards and have something similar to like SHRM, where we can all congregate together and be on the same page in terms of like the things that we need to learn, and access to visibility and equity, even in compensation and speaker rates and all that stuff. But for right now, in the now, I don't think there is an easy solution, in my opinion. I do think that those of us who have been in the space a little bit longer can work a little bit harder to promote the people who recently transitioned, and provide not mentorship, because I feel like that's a very intentional thing and you have to have the bandwidth to do that, but some sort of like guidance or sharing of knowledge in some capacity to help the newer people. And referrals. I refer a lot of people. I don't want all the work on me. Listen, I'm a Black woman in this space. I'm already tired. Life is tiring. I don't want to be burdened anymore. So it's enough work out here for all of us. DEI happens across the world. Every community needs equity. So there's more than enough work. And I feel like if we all inhibit that mindset, that can help. I don't think it's a systemic or structural solution, but those are actions that we can take on an individual level, in my opinion.
And saying it's so funny because my episode next week is with Cornell Verdeja Woodson, talking about what to look for in a DEI practitioner, right, for companies to hire. So like you're spot on with that. And then I'm also doing a later episode about standardization, because that was one of the questions that was on here as well too. So Katrina, I know you are itching to say stuff because I can see
Itching and trying to play double dutch in this conversation. I think there's so much here about, one, how this work has been constructed within organizations, and that there are a lot of different ways to get into the work. And look within, let's say, corporate institutions, or even higher ed, you'll see that there's often the work has been under resourced. They're, team of one, or very, very small teams. And so there hasn't been a lot of opportunity to get into this space. And thinking and looking across the space and thinking about how people would enter into the space. Sometimes it's because, there was somebody who was in a business role who was leading up an ERG and who then got tapped to move into a head of D&I role when the company decided to create or establish D&I as a function. And so it really has evolved and continues to evolve. And so there are so many different ways, and that's how I would answer this, is that there are a lot of different ways you can get involved, that you can step into this work. And maybe we need to think more expansively about the ways in which to do that, because it doesn't just come through a role on the team. It also comes through, organizations, justice organizations, community organizations that are doing this work. And those are incredibly great places to go and grow and learn this work.
Wow, thank you. So we have a live caller, y'all. Hello, caller.
Derek, go ahead. Derek, you're up.
Eric, can you hear us?
Yep.
Go ahead with your question.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. I can.
Yes.
You hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Go ahead with your question.
Okay. So the question I have for the panel is, what was the first transition that you made to the DEI space?
All right. Thank you, Derek. We'll get a couple of answers on that. Diya, do you want to answer that one first?
Yeah, I'd say the first transition for me was going from nonprofit to profit and into tech, which is its own space altogether. And seeing how this work is done was illuminating, and it was there were a lot of micro learning moments there that I would say are very influential in how I do this work now. I think that in every industry, there's something we can learn about how to do this work, but also something we can add, to that value of how we do that work.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of several, but it was an important pivoting point for me personally.
Katrina, Sam, I have an answer too. Mine's crazy, but go ahead.
Go ahead, Katrina.
No. I defer to you, and I'm kind of curious, Sacha, about your. Yes.
Yeah. I've had quite a few transitions. So I've been in a role that is not designated to be DEI specific, but still doing DEI work. I've been a consultant. I've been a director. So at an executive level, I've been in nonprofit. I've been in higher ed. I've been in the federal space, and all of those, there's a very central or common issues in each role. But there are also nuances depending on the dynamics and environment within each organization. So their organizational structure, how many employees, the purpose of the role. So like how the role got started, why they created that role. So that's like a high level overview of the transitions. I don't know how much more specific the caller wanted us to be, but I could talk for days.
It's interesting because I think for me, so I talked about how I started in sociology. I focused on cultural diversity and ethnicity. I worked in the Office of Multicultural Affairs, so I was doing the diversity thing before it was a diversity thing. And had in my early career some aspect of it in my role until I got to tech. And when I got to tech, because I was hired to do field marketing, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to learn tech marketing and focus on field marketing. And I'm putting diversity and inclusion on the back burner because that's not paying me. It's been stuff. I mean, it was paying me, but I really wanted to just kind of pivot. And so what ended up happening was I was hired by a small tech company to manage East Coast marketing. So I didn't have to move, but I was the first, I believe, Black female that the company had hired. And within 2 months, I had a situation happen where, long story short, I was mistaken for another Black woman in a hotel and propositioned. And HR was just like, you misunderstood what he said. Okay. So then fast forward maybe another year or two, another situation happened where, again, I'm the only one in the room, and a sales guy who had been drinking a little bit talked about how racism had only come back with the Obama administration. And so at that point, I was just like, you know what? I'm about to change the name of this company because it's about to go down. And so I purposefully decided to go back into DEI and worked with the CTO and CEO on what does that look like here. And so started the first set of ERGs, started defining what diversity and inclusion looked like. So co-authored the first diversity statement for them, and really just started doing that off the side of my desk for another year and a half before I decided I needed to go and pivot full time. So yeah, it was more out of necessity because like I said, I was the only Black female when I first hired. But I didn't want any other people to come after me to experience what I had experienced.
That is such a powerful story. I won't even try to. It's powerful because you turned your pain into purpose, and power in that, and said, I'm going to do something now. This is fuel for me. And I think that for so many of us who are in this space, we are fueled by it, if it's, our personal experiences and some pain out of that, as well as the experiences of, other people, other employees that are fuel for us and really working internally to change systems.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm trying to see, let's see if there are any other questions that are coming in. I don't see any. All right, but I do have some that came through email. So as companies are continuing to do this work, where should they focus their efforts first? So if anyone wants to jump in.
I'll go ahead and contribute right before I have to leave for the night. So I am a strong advocate of DEI strategies. That's what I do. And I am a firm believer that having a strategy is important and should be one of the first steps. So before I dive into that, I want to say that there are a few things that should happen in tandem once you're starting the process of truly committing to DEI and intertwining it into your company's operations, because you can't just dive in and start building a strategy if the leadership team doesn't even know the difference between equity and equality, if they don't even know what a microaggression is. So, I think a strategy is the framework and the tool and the process that you need to actually start. There is some level of awareness and education that needs to happen. Now, there's a caveat to that. A lot of companies use education and awareness as the starting and the stopping. So all they do is hire a bunch of consultants to come and give trainings and workshops and presentations, and they just keep doing that, and they don't do anything else. So I think both things should happen in tandem so that the leadership team is educated on a foundational level, because they still have to be intentional and do their own education. To me, that signifies true commitment. So that's one. And then they have to be aware of some of the issues and understand it on a foundational level before they can even start to think about a strategy. Now, if that first part is taken care of, the strategy is, I have a five phase framework that I use, and it's just outlining, it's like a business strategy. And it's just putting I like to say, a DEI set of glasses on the business strategy. So you're looking at each department within a company and seeing where the gaps are in terms of equity and inclusion, and looking at the different marginalized groups, both internally, so your employees and your consumers, and seeing where the gaps are related to those groups and how that ties to the mission of the company. And that is how you create a strategy that is incorporated into the company's operation by tying it to the mission. So you shouldn't, like, if you're a glasses company, you shouldn't be like lens crafters. They shouldn't be trying to talk about, I don't know what's a good example. Like, everything they do should be focused on creating equitable access to glasses. So can people with disabilities gain access to your glasses? I do have a good example for that. So I read somewhere that when the first glasses was created, the bridge nose part was fitted only for white noses. And so thinking on that level of, oh, all my glasses needs to be adjustable to fit the nose bridge of different types of people with different phenotypes, I think, or physical attributes. That's an example of truly using a lens of equity and inclusion, both externally and internally. Because if that's the case, you're going to have to get feedback from people with different types of nose bridges. You're going to have people inside that relate to those different groups of people. The people inside would need a culture to make them feel included and equitable, to feel safe, to work there, to do this work. So it all ties together. And that's just like a very high level of why I believe DEI strategies are like the first thing you need to do. Like, don't go out and try to recruit diverse people. No. For one, because you don't even know what diversity means for your company. If you
Or they're bringing them into a toxic environment and they're going to leave anyway.
Yes, that's the second part. Like, what are you even looking for? One, and then two, if you hire them, second, before we even get there, second, the job description, is it even accessible to reach these diverse candidates? And then third, once you get them, do you have the policies in place to keep them there and make them feel safe? So a strategy outlines all of those things because it touches on each aspect, each department within a company. That's my contribution.
Thank you, Dr. Sam. And I know you have to go, but it's so funny that you said that because that's one of the questions on my intake form, right? For my clients is, do you have a DEI strategy? Yes, no. And if so, how does this fit? How does this request fit into that strategy? Because if they can't answer that, then I'm like, okay. Like, that's another conversation that we need to have. But no, Dr. Sam, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. And it was great to be on stage with you ladies. Have a great rest of the day. And I look forward to being in community with you all and talking about wonderful topics like this again in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk soon.
Thank you.
All right, Diya or Katrina, do you want to jump in on that question?
I would just love to add one thing to what Dr. Sam said, and that's specifically about, when we lose people. Often when we hire someone, we hire a person, but when we lose someone, we also lose their community. We lose their trusted people. And I don't think organizations have caught on to this yet, that we put a lot of emphasis on the hiring stage. But if we're not giving people an experience when they're on the inside, where they feel welcome, where they feel like they've been fairly treated, when they leave, we're actually losing a lot of candidates with them. And then the other thing I wanted to say is something that I think organizations need is a culture of accountability, because when we have that strategy, we often see it falling through the grates if people just say, okay, well, everybody was trying their best and the effort was here, and just turning an eye to the behavior. So I would really encourage companies and organizations to not only adopt that culture, but put it in writing somewhere, so that when somebody who's favored or preferred within the industry does something, and they very often do, that we hold them to, a standard of ethics that they can't skirt past.
Yeah. And I think it's so critical, something you touched on. One of the questions that I offer, right, because I try to coach people through this, is what traditions are you willing to give up in your culture? Right. And you have to give it up. And if someone doesn't give it up, then what are the consequences of that? And so that speaks directly to that accountability piece. Katrina.
Yeah, that's a question that I ask with clients. As we're talking about strategy, and oftentimes the clients that I work with are, we're working together because they've got what I call a spaghetti wall of programmatic initiatives that they're doing all the things, yes to ERGs and book clubs and all of the things, and taking that and saying, you actually want to plug into a comprehensive and defined DEI strategy, and it has to connect to your business strategy. And part of that is, what is your commitment to this work? Yeah. What are you willing to commit to? And similarly, what are you willing to give up to bring this work and make this work successful. And I think that's so important to understand what you are saying yes to and what you are willing to give up in order to bring this work to life.
Love it. So another question that has come in is, as a new DEI practitioner, as it relates to data collection, what resources are available?
Katrina is just an expert in data
Oh,
and resources.
wait.
That's the data diva.
We are both here, and I was like, "Ooh,
Yeah.
who's gonna?" All the so population. It depends on what you're looking for. This is another part of, as we're talking about the experience that employees have, Diya, what you were saying about an employee leaves, but their community leaves as well. There are always signals that employers, organizations should collect that they probably are collecting in some way. Sometimes they're avoiding or writing off those signals, right? Because, oh, it's just one or two people, or, and it's really easy to make up stories about what a signal is telling us and what a person is telling us. But you should have access to all of this organizational data about, yes, the EEO self-ID data that employees are completing if you're in the US. If you're in Canada, for instance, there's data that's collected about the demographic information, individual demographic information of employees. Population statistics. You can pull data from usually census data of that country, as well as, statistics about educational attainment from across university systems, from college systems. There's data everywhere. And there's also tons of data that you can pull from other organizations that now is being neatly captured and summarized by major publications about. There was just an article the other day about Bloomberg. They're tracking now all of the EEO1 data reported from Fortune 100 companies and Fortune 500 companies, and analyzing who discloses what, et cetera. So there's lots of data that you can pull in here that you can also use to make your case for more data, to say we should be collecting this information, and this is what competitors and peers are doing in this space, and here's what that looks like. So long way to say it depends on what you're trying to collect, but there's data just everywhere that you have to go dig for and start to search and start to pick apart.
Great. So Diya, before you jump in, I just want to do a quick reminder to folks that if they have not seen the QR code or the website, I am giving away 2 free memberships, 2 one-year memberships to Shine, the meditation and self-care and wellness app. And so go ahead and do that. And, hopefully you'll win, because I think that it's a fabulous thing. And if anyone knows me knows that I absolutely love self-care and wellness. So Diya, I want to get you in there.
I would love to respond, Katrina, to what you said about data. One really important point is that we, as a collective, like as a DEI collective, as a community, we can rely on each other for these resources. We can say, hey, I know I message Sacha and Katrina often to say, I'm looking for an updated piece of data on this to show where the gaps are and where the work needs to be done. And it's a back and forth. And I think that this is a reason why we need to approach this work as a community, because coming back to the earlier point, we can't be expected to be experts on everything. And some of us may have insights into resources that are not the mainstream, but give us very relevant information. The other piece I wanted to add is that when we do get access to that data, we want to make sure it is intersectional. Sacha, you've always made this point, like, whose voices are we not hearing from? If we come back to this piece about safety, when people are doing surveys, are they in a safe enough environment to share what their actual sentiments are? Are we tracking that data accurately? I just wanted to say, as a woman of South Asian descent, there's a very big difference of my representation in the workplace than Southeast Asians, but we're very often collectively grouped under one identity. But when we further break down that dynamic, then we can see where the gaps in representation lie. So all of this to say that when we do pull that data, we want to make sure that it's really coming back to the problems that we're trying to solve and help and give access to those communities that we're trying to give access to.
You know, I'm over here. Woohoo, yes. What's the information at those intersections, right? Because that's where the gaps are. That's where we miss out. You know, it's so interesting because even when I do, well, I was going to say in response to both of you too, is sometimes the data are the stories, right? That anecdotal data is, and you know, once you start to realize, okay, maybe this isn't a one-off, maybe there's a pattern here, and it's not just a complaint, but when you notice like there's certain groups that are saying the same thing, that's an area that needs to be addressed, right? Go ahead, Katrina.
Yeah, because that is one that I have seen often in this space of a willingness or an eagerness, I should say, to write off a single piece of feedback or feedback from a particular person as simply a quote unquote complaint, or it is just that
person.
And I think it would be what would really transform our organizations is if we took every single piece of feedback, right? Because that one person, they're in small numbers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And two, they're often, because you're from multiple marginalized, you may be holding multiple marginalized identities, and so many of us in these communities are taught and socialized not to speak up, not to complain. You keep your head down, you do the work, and so it's really quite difficult to even to do that, to share that kind of critical feedback. And it would be, again, transformative if we looked at that as the gift that it is and used it to say, okay, let's actually do something about this, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it is from one person, and we should look into this. We should see what about this and what about this feedback can be useful to us and we can use to make changes in our organization, in our policies, in our environment, in our culture.
And see that person as an opportunity, because if the fact that they're speaking up means that they care enough to see change, right? And so, because if they didn't care, they wouldn't say anything, they just leave.
Right.
So I think that is the gift that so many organizations are missing out on. You know, the second piece kind of goes back to what Diya said. I offer 2 assessments, and this is outside of what organizations offer, because I have found that folks will not tell the organization everything, right? A third party comes in, all of a sudden they want to tell all the secrets, which is fine, which is great. But what I have also started to do was, let me talk to the most marginalized people on your team. And I do one-on-one conversations in addition to the assessment, because their voices will get lost if you're looking at it at aggregate, right? So how do I do that? And that's when I'm able to really see, okay, I'm seeing some things around microaggressions here. I'm seeing some other issues and challenges here that may not come up in that data set. The other thing goes to what Diya was saying around that intersectional data, right? We do an equity assessment and it comes back at all those intersections, right? So I can tell you what a Latina is experiencing within the organization at a general high level and start to break that down. And I think that that's so critical, because at least my experience has been sometimes organizations don't want to see the truth. So yeah. Any comments? I'm gonna go, let's see. We will get Jamaica's information out to folks, because folks are like, oh, we want to get her information. So yes. So Ruth has said, do you notice a difference in getting traction in an organization if the leader has lived experience? And also, have you seen models outside of ERGs that promote sharing stories? And hey, Ruth, I know Ruth. So either of you can answer that question.
I've seen this go two ways. I do think that lived experience does, in some ways, validate you coming into these roles. And you're seen as having a perspective that's both important and necessary to the work. And it also creates challenges for you because you are, as I like to say, you are doing the work while you are the work, right? And so I don't, as a Black woman, I don't take off, my Blackness, nor my gender when I walk into a room. And so those things all impact how I'm perceived and how I'm received in the work, sometimes in a negative fashion. So it can work both, I think, for you and also can work against you some ways as you're, working to bring solutions to life, to start to make changes within the organization. So it both and for that question.
Yeah, I was just going to say too, it depends on if the company really wants to change, right? Because I've seen, and there have been some stories that have come out of recently of people, particularly women of color, being placed in these roles just as a token, right? To say, yep, we've checked the box, we have someone in that role, but they're not given power, they're not given any access to anyone, they cannot make systemic change. And so they end up leaving very quickly, and so because they see, okay, this is not what I signed up for. So yes, I agree with the yes and.
Yeah, I also agree that lived experience is really important if the organization values it. One of the things that I've seen happen is that some companies come back and almost in some way or form say, prove it's a problem, prove it, prove it, prove it. But when you have a leader that has a combination of the professional experience and the personal experience, they might be able to navigate those nuances and explain that not everything is limited to a number. There's, to your earlier point, Sacha, there's stories behind it. There's patterns behind it. There may be things that we're not even asking. So are we even measuring it if we're not even asking the question to begin with? So I do absolutely see a value in leaders with lived experiences. I mean, we all have lived experiences, but I think when we speak about lived experiences, we're talking about what it means to, Katrina, your point, do the work and be the work. It's a different space. And I think with that space, you also lend others the kindness and the curiosity and the humility of yourself, knowing that you don't have all the answers. If you have a leader that comes in and says, I know everything, this is the way, this is we're going to do it, that can often stall the work faster than somebody that doesn't have or does have the lived experience.
Yeah. And I think if somebody comes in saying they know all the things, that's a red flag. Because I'm like, guess what? Not so much.
It is humility and curiosity that we've been talking about. And I saw a comment, Andre, I think it was, who was saying, I know I don't know all the things. And I'm eager to pull in and hear from experts and compensate them for knowledge, for their time, for their efforts in helping me to shape and to figure this out.
Yeah. And, I just, in transparency, we've all talked about it to some degree, but the importance of community, right? I talk about it all the time. The DEI After 5 with Diya, we talked about community. We talked about it in yours, Katrina, too, where it's such a critical part of this, because not only can you share with each other, you hold each other up. Because as I've been saying lately, this has been my word for like the last couple of weeks, there's a lot of foolishness that goes on in some of these organizations. And it's okay, how do we work through this? How do we support each other in that? And I think that that's a critical piece of this work, is finding community and finding others that you can lean on and you could support as well.
Dia, what did you say? What did you say in the chat? Community is?
Community is abundance. It is, it's the intentional disposing of scarcity to say there's only space for one. I think for a lot of women of color, for Black and brown women, we fear that if we, get a role that or somebody else gets a role, that's one less role for us. But community is intentionally stepping out of that mindset and saying there's space for all of us. If I support you, then you support me, and we're collectively rising.
Yeah. And I think that's so beautiful and powerful, because again, that's how we create change. We can't do it one individual at a time. So I do have, let's see, one more question. While I'm looking for this question, make sure that you go to the QR code or the web link to register and get your name in for the Shine membership. And so the next question, is going to be, I like the messy stuff. So I ask you this question and see what happens. And this actually came out of a conversation, my post yesterday. And so just to give people some insight on my post yesterday, I said, part of the reason why your DEI efforts are failing is because it's housed in HR, right? And so I said that they can't be judge and jury. And I sit in a unique position because I coach practitioners that are absolutely trying to do the work and hitting walls and all of the things. But then I also coach people of color that are still dealing with microaggressions and all of these things that they've reported through the process, where they have found their claims to be unsubstantiated, or that they're actually the problem. And so there's no real recourse for employees. So someone, and I'm sorry, I forgot the name, asked the question, are we hindering in-house DEI practitioners when we say, be wary of HR? I told y'all I like the dirty stuff. So yeah.
I know. Almost into the floor. I don't know. So, and I want to step back because I'm careful about this, because I think it's really easy to demonize an entire function that's made up of people. And I see this on both sides, because I also see and experience people saying DEI is not valuable, right? The function is not changing anything. And we have to consider who our systems were built for, how they were designed, right? The original intended user of our workplaces, of our organizations, was not people who look like us, right? And so all the policies, all the practices are built out of that. And we have to look more critically about the roots in order to start getting to places where we can change and also solve things. And I'm even hesitating here because what I worry about is it pushes us further apart, rather than creating space for us to come together to say, I don't think you think this is working well either, right? I think we if we can both come into a conversation and thinking about what could we change for the better, right? And stay there and hear from both sides, because with my former forever HR hat, I also understand the function of that, role in that industry. And I think now we're at a place where there's hopefully a greater opportunity for us to come together in a real collaborative fashion to rethink the way that we work, our workplaces, and who, again, coming back to who were they designed for? How do we design for a different population.
Yeah, I love that, because I think it is, and I said this maybe last year, my question was, how do we dismantle HR, and not dismantle it in a way where it's like get rid of it, but it's how do we reimagine what this looks like, right? So that everyone feels as if they are seen, heard, valued, respected, and that they have a voice. Because I think that's the piece right now that a lot of people are struggling with is, are you really here for me, or are you here to get my information to protect the company? And that's the piece that I think we need to really rethink and figure out within each organization, because every organization is different. And so what does that look like? Diya?
Yeah, there's a quote out there, something about if you want change, one of the most effective things you can do is ask a question instead of telling someone what to do. So I would ask the question to an organization, is what you're doing right now working? And if the DEI function is sitting within HR, is it creating the impact or the change or the inclusion that you would hope it would? Because if it doesn't, then it's time for us to challenge things a little bit. And I also wonder, why does DEI have to sit under any function? It is a critical function in its own. Having it ladder up to the highest ranks of the organization, having a chief diversity officer or somebody who's working directly with the highest ranks of the company is probably the most effective way for us to do this work, because we're not facing the barriers to implementation that we would if we were within another department. I do think that there's a really great opportunity for people within DEI to co-create, co-function, collaborate with HR, with legal, with a number of different departments. But the three of us had talked about this before. DEI is a critical function to any organization. So maybe we should start treating it as such.
Amen. 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 All right. So the last question that I have, because we're coming up on time, and I'm going to ask this, is what advice would you give practitioners to ensure that they don't lose themselves in this work?
So two pieces of advice here, and I'll make this quick. One, and actually go through this as an exercise to write down your why. So just the way that you asked all of us, why, kind of what brought us into this work and the why. And as I'm listening, I'm hearing, and you can feel the sweetness in the memories. And you have to remember the why, and that, part of you that just saw yourself and sees yourself as an instrument for change, and wants to make the world a better place, as idealistic as it is. But that's the sweetness that we have to stay connected to. The other piece of advice is to keep a list of wins, so that when you're having those days where you want to flip over your tables and desks and all that stuff, you could go somewhere and you could sit with that and think about the good that you've done, the impact that you've had, that you see that, right? And so it's all going for something, contributing towards something greater.
Thank you. Diya?
I think doing some value searching, knowing what's important to you, where you stand in this world, has helped me personally. And I also think that taking the approach that we're holistic human beings, we're not pieces that we're trying to solve, is another approach that really helps. Be kind to each other, lead with curiosity, embrace humility. It's okay to say we don't know the answers. These are practices that intentionally defy some of the power dynamics that we see in our traditional workplaces. So by leading like that, by leading with an abundance mindset and saying, I'm not in competition with, others that look like me, can help us come back to a place of being able to go to sleep at the end of night, feeling rested and content with what we're doing. And like Katrina said, there's going to be moments when we really do struggle. And I think that's okay too. We can't be expected to be on our, number one game all the time, because if we were, then we wouldn't be human.
I love it. I love it. I think you both pointed out things that I coach people on all the time, right? It's what are your values and making sure that you're in alignment with those values. But then the why, like, why do you want to do this work? What is your purpose? And honing in on that and remembering and recalling that in the tough times. My piece of advice would be to remember what brings you joy. And that's not necessarily tied to work, but that's just in life. And hold on to those things that bring you joy. And so it could be spending time with your family or watching a movie or, whatever it is, but always tapping back into that, because like both of them have said, this work goes up and down, and it's always wonderful to be able to center to a place that just lightens your heart, right? And brings you joy. So I want to thank all of my guests for tonight. Dr. Sam, who had to leave a little bit early, Katrina Jones, Diya Khanna. I mean, I just knew that this was going to be an amazing conversation, and we could probably go on and on and on, and I'm sure we'll get some more questions after this is over. But I want to thank you both for this. And if anybody has not watched DEI After 5, both of them have episodes that are fire. They're amazing. So just want to make sure that you all get to see that. And thank you all for joining. DEI After 5 comes out every Tuesday at 5:15 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. And so make sure that you catch that there, or you can find it on your favorite podcasting platform. Also, yes, Jamika Osborne is our ASL interpreter, and you can find her on LinkedIn because she's amazing, amazing, amazing. So thank you. And again, if you have, this is going to be the last opportunity to sign up and enter in for the Shine drawing. And so I'll be giving away 2 one-year memberships to the Shine app for folks. So thank you so much for joining today. I hope that you've enjoyed this and taken away quite a few nuggets, because there was just so much information that was given today. Look forward to seeing you on the next DEI After 5 Live, and we'll talk later. Have a good one.